i problemi tecnici. Buongiorno ancora, benvenuti a tutti. Come dicevo, il nome dell'evento appunto Cybersecurity, the role of Italian National Postal and Communication Police against cybercrime. Parleremo quindi del ruolo della Polizia Postale e delle Comunicazioni con il nostro prestigioso ospite, la dottoressa Nunzia Ciardi, direttrice della Polizia Postale. Ma prima di iniziare l'evento vorrei dare la parola ai direttori dei due dipartimenti di ingegneria e del dipartimento di matematica, che sono appunto i due dipartimenti che supportano questa iniziativa della laurea magistrale in cybersecurity. Gaudenzio, a te la parola.
Grazie Mauro, sono Gaudenzio Meneghesso, il direttore di
Professor Meneghesso.
Per me è un vero piacere dare i saluti iniziali a questo workshop dove illustri speaker oggi operanti nell'ambito della Polizia Postale ci daranno il loro punto di vista su questa tematica importante e attuale. Io credo che la sicurezza informatica o la cybersecurity sia oggi una delle problematiche più pervasive dal punto di vista industriale, economico, sociale e riguarda poi ogni tipo di organizzazione, la pubblica, la privata e anche sempre di più il singolo individuo. Ma solo per fare un esempio, ho letto recentemente nel World Economic Forum a maggio hanno condotto uno studio sulle conseguenze e i rischi prodotti dalla pandemia e ha individuato la crescita dei cyber attack e delle frodi proprio dovute alle nuove pratiche lavorative, lo smart working. E questo rappresenta il terzo rischio per le aziende e il nono a livello globale. Quindi è chiaro che questo è un elemento veramente critico. Oltretutto un'analisi del mercato recentemente svolta ha evidenziato che lo specialista di sicurezza informatica è oggi una delle professionalità più richieste e al tempo stesso meno presente e più scarsa nel mercato. Ora, il mio dipartimento di ingegneria dell'informazione è veramente orgoglioso di essere uno disciplinarietà a un livello molto elevato ed è un corso di laurea interdipartimentale, un esperimento fatto nell'Università di Padova come una laurea gestita tra due dipartimenti e questo devo dire è stato un esperimento sicuramente estremamente positivo. Ovviamente questa laurea sostiene le richieste sempre più crescenti di esperti di questa specializzazione intersettoriale che richiedono non solo le conoscenze avanzate nelle scienze e tecnologie dell'informazione, quindi elettronica, informatica, bioingegneria, automatica, ma anche una buona comprensione di aspetti delle scienze sociali, come la psicologia, il management, l'economia e il diritto. E questa è un po' l'unicità di questa cosa. Io veramente ho vissuto con grande entusiasmo questa nuova avventura, ci siamo messi a lavorare assieme al collega Chiarellotto, e penso che abbiamo fatto sicuramente un ottimo lavoro. Permettetemi di fare un grosso ringraziamento sicuramente ai nostri speaker per la loro disponibilità a condividere questa loro preziosa conoscenza ed esperienza e al collega Mauro Conti che ha organizzato questo interessante workshop. Grazie a tutti per l'attenzione, vi auguro un'interessante sessione che sia utile e che vi divertiate. Grazie, buona giornata a tutti.
Grazie mille. Professor Meneghesso, lascio la parola al direttore del Dipartimento di Matematica, il professor Bruno Chiarellotto.
Grazie a tutti, sono Bruno Chiarellotto, sono, come ha detto Mauro Conti, direttore del Dipartimento di Matematica, che è uno dei co-organizzatori della laurea e anche di questo evento. Un benvenuto a tutti voi e un ringraziamento alla direttrice Nunzia Ciardi di essere qui con noi e di partecipare a questo evento. In questo periodo di pandemia abbiamo visto in qualche maniera come la ricerca fatta anche a livello teorico e iniziata anche tanto tempo fa abbia inaspettatamente portato dei risultati. Guardiamo anche allo studio che è stato fatto sui vaccini, senza aver pensato in maniera completamente teorica certi studi non potremmo avere, speriamo abbastanza presto, dei vaccini che ci aiutano contro questa pandemia. In qualche maniera anche il problema della cybersecurity si può vedere in questa maniera, diciamo, parallela. Tempo fa si pensava che il problema della cybersecurity fosse un problema connesso con la sicurezza nazionale, con i militari, diciamo, con la warfare, con criminali di alto livello. Oggigiorno noi ritroviamo questo problema in qualsiasi passo della nostra esistenza, dall'aspirapolvere, dall'uso dei nostri telefonini, dai remote control, dai controllori della televisione, delle nostre porte, dell'apertura delle nostre diciamo, case per entrare nelle nostre abitazioni. E soprattutto l'uso anche di questa dell'uso di tecniche, diciamo, informatiche anche da criminali di bassissimo livello. Ecco che allora l'importanza di questo studio, che può sembrare, per così dire, che poteva sembrare abbastanza astratto, ecco che ricade nella vita di ogni giorno. E anche la presenza della polizia ci sta dicendo che, come per ogni cosa, anche per ogni cosa, sia importante è che lo studio di questi argomenti e come l'impatto nella nostra esistenza sia sempre presente di problemi connessi con la cybersecurity. Per questo io ringrazio gli organizzatori di questo evento, ringrazio la dottoressa Ciardi di essere qui con noi e di introdurci su quelli che sono i problemi di tutti i giorni. Quindi io spero e sono sicuro che questo convegno sarà di ottimo livello e che gli interventi che seguiranno saranno di ispirazione per tutti noi e soprattutto per voi studenti. Pensiamo che questo vostro studio sarà importantissimo negli anni a venire. Grazie a tutti voi.
Grazie, ringrazio i direttori per il saluto e in generale per il supporto alla nuova laurea. Colgo l'occasione ovviamente per ringraziare diciamo, tutti i colleghi che appunto insegnano in questa nuova laurea e tutto diciamo, il supporto amministrativo e tecnico dell'Ateneo che permette oltre questo webinar anche diciamo, l'esecuzione di tutta la laurea. Un benvenuto ancora agli studenti e tutti gli ospiti che stanno partecipando. In particolare ho visto online anche la dottoressa Fusiello, questore di Padova, che gentilmente era anche presente all'evento di inaugurazione della nostra laurea il 3 giugno scorso. Questo di oggi è il primo seminario della nostra laurea in Cybersecurity. L'incontro appunto pone l'attenzione sul ruolo fondamentale della Polizia Postale e delle Comunicazioni nel contrasto alle organizzazioni criminali che, come sappiamo, sono diventate sempre più aggressive e anche strutturate nel sistema cibernetico. Abbiamo appunto oggi con noi una prestigiosissima ospite, la dottoressa Nunzia Ciardi, dirigente superiore della Polizia di Stato e direttore del servizio Polizia Postale e delle Comunicazioni. È laureata in giurisprudenza con una pregressa pluriennale esperienza come direttore della prima divisione del servizio Polizia Postale e successivamente come dirigente del compartimento Polizia Postale e delle Comunicazioni del Lazio. Coordina attualmente unità specializzate della Polizia di Stato nel contrasto al cyberterrorismo, al financial cybercrime, pedopornografia online, tutela delle infrastrutture critiche, informatiche nazionali, all'hacking e ai crimini informatici in generale. È membro della European Union Cybercrime Task Force di Europol, è coordinatore e membro di gruppi di lavoro sulla tutela dei minori nel mondo della comunicazione, sulla disinformazione in ambito di piattaforme digitali e sicurezza digitale. La dottoressa Ciardi è rappresentante del Ministero dell'Interno in seno al Nucleo Sicurezza Cibernetica ed al tavolo tecnico cyber. Svolge attività di docenza presso le scuole di polizia e numerosi enti. I hope we'll solve also the English translation, so we can not overlap the two languages. I wait maybe a moment to see whether we can solve this online.
There's a man.
Yes, I understood.
I thought that it was a cyber
Stiamo cercando di risolvere, non so se abbiamo risolto, qualcuno mi conferma?
Yeah.
Mi confermate che ora siamo non overlapped con le due lingue?
Comunque Mauro, io non ho mai sentito l'overlap, io sento solo la tua voce e non sento l'overlap, quindi tranquillo.
Ok, no, mi preoccupa perché vedo qualche partecipante che nelle question and answer session ci segnala cosa.
Bisogna fare l'aggiornamento di Zoom, lo faccio
io ora non sento più la traduttrice. Sì, l'importante non lo so perché io sono sul canale in italiano. Laurenti conferma che sentiva anche Larisa. Non so se i tecnici riescono diciamo o in un minuto a risolvere oppure magari andiamo avanti e yes, I would chiederei anche alla dottoressa Ciardi magari di parlare oltre, insomma, un po' lentamente, ma magari di fermarsi per dare spazio appunto alla traduttrice e per non sovrapporre le lingue, per chi eventualmente ascolta la traduzione, se riusciamo a risolvere nel frattempo il problema ve lo segnaliamo. Scusate ancora l'interruzione, ringrazio ancora moltissimo la dottoressa Ciardi a cui lascerei la parola.
We welcome Mrs. Ciardi, Director of the National Postal Communications Police.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone.
Innanzitutto adesso sento una volta la traduttrice, quindi deve essere cambiato qualcosa. Se non riusciamo a risolvere il problema, magari io mi fermo ogni tanto e lascerò che la traduttrice faccia il suo.
La lingua ora e forse risolviamo. Nel frattempo magari possiamo comunque andare avanti. Grazie ancora, scusate.
Ecco, io ho riscelto l'italiano, se l'interprete può parlare un attimo, vedo se si sovrappone. Immagino stia parlando, io non la sento, quindi avendo riselezionato l'italiano, io per quanto mi riguarda avrei risolto il problema. Non so se lo hanno risolto tutti, ditemi se è il caso che io mi fermi proprio per dar modo alla traduttrice di tradurre o se mi basta fare piccole pause per consentire a lei di fare al meglio il lavoro.
Ok, io nel frattempo ho riscelto la lingua e effettivamente non sento più la traduttrice, a meno che abbia smesso di parlare. Insomma.
Io leggo qualche messaggio che passa e mi sembra da quelli che...
Ok, ci sono anch'io. Let's try. I want to thank you for being here. And it's not to be polite, but I'm very happy to be here. I truly believe in this domain and this subject because contamination is contamination and diversity is between diverse domains is fundamental and very important. As a domain such as this, which is central in the Western world, in our daily lives, should not be a theme that is only dealt by technicians, and I truly believe in this. So contamination, to me, is always a form of enrichment. And this domain should not be exclusive to technicians, or digital technicians, cyber technicians, or security technicians. In a meeting some time ago, the theme of digital renaissance was the focus. The internet really needs to be reflected on, and it's a very difficult reflection, which can be slippery as it entails important aspects, because it has to do with the freedom or presumed freedom of the network, the net. And in this domain, professional figures really are called for, which are different from the traditional figures. So professional skills and specialists that have even a background in humanities. This, as a premise, is She's speaking slowly to help the translation process. I'm adamant about this, and I truly believe in, and often say this, that this digital progress, this digital revolution, has not been a revolution that is merely technological, nor was it a cultural, an exclusively cultural revolution, but an anthropological revolution that in a very short span of time has brought us face to face to a very different reality from what we were used to. And this generates a series of difficulties that we can not put our attention to. So in considering security within this domain, there's a word that reflects this approach, which is a holistic approach to this domain. Now I'll get into the topic, cybersecurity and the role of the police, of the law enforcement, of the police like ours that fights cybercrime. Nowadays, a country that is considered as evolved cannot have a lack or not have, and to be competitive must be digitalized and must have all services that are digitalized, including institutions, all the fundamental structures that the state requires, public and private, need to be digitalized. So digitalization should be considered as a resource which enables a country to be competitive. The security of this system, therefore, is a fundamental need to enable such competitiveness And there's a constant need for balance between digitalization needs that are ever more demanding and security needs. Nowadays, cybercrime is no doubt the main threat in terms of criminal organizations that affects the economic system of the country. And this is due to a series of factors, many, which can isolate among them, because in our sector, we can speak about widespread diffusion and cheap software that can be used to break into networks, in IT, and computers. This widespread diffusion and their cost is becoming cheaper and cheaper progressively, as is the spike of crime and cybercrime. So criminal organizations and malicious attacks are very, very varied and different. There's national, there are national threats. So we are concentrating mostly on cybercrime of the traditional kind. So cybercrime that aims at taking money, or data that can be then converted into profit. So cybercrime can be subdivided into many ways. So a state threat attack, an activist threat attack, a terrorist attack threat, and strictly cybercrime. So cybercrime is a segment which is the core of our competence, has to do with cybercrime that can be differentiated in various ways. So one is pulverized, so low technical skills are needed for that. Then there's a more organized form of crime. And then there is an infiltration. And we have no doubt about this because we've seen this in our investigations of a very highly and well-organized crime organization. A very organized crime. There's both Italian and international. And very often, such structured, organized crime that is very malicious, if it does not have within its organization the skills and specializations that have to do with technology, they will buy them. So there's a dark web which sells specialized packages that can be bought. So the criminal organization offers the structure, the frame, to then allow criminal strategies to be implemented, and they buy the skills, the specialized skills that they do not have within them. I'll talk about a structured and organized system of crime, because when I will speak about certain types of crimes, that these types of crimes cannot be managed by a single individual or simple hackers who decide to infiltrate information, for example, 18 million euros, which is an amount which we have come across when conducting our investigations. It's not a number just thrown there. Now, 18 million euros. Can this sum be managed in a simple way? Now, these sums, these hefty sums, really need structured, organized organization to be laundered and to be reinvested. And I will continue on with other themes now. Okay, yes. Everything's okay. We'll now continue. So some figures. So to see numerically the problem, the figures may not express everything, but in certain cases, they can tell us a lot. So from 2014 to 2019, cybercrime, which I spoke about earlier, has proven to be the first cause of severe attacks. From 2014 to 2019, it increased by 162%. So from 2018 to 2019, there were another increase, only focusing on cybercrime only. So we exclude all other forms of things like activism or that have not to do with the real crime, an extra 12.3%. Such percentages are worrying and call for attention. If such percentages were found in ordinary crimes, they would make everyone tremble and shake. Imagine theft in apartments or robberies, increasing by 162%. Such figures would be terrorizing. But this is nothing compared to what you'll see, because the figures refer to the period before the pandemic, and now we shall see what happened with the COVID, and how much worse the situation has become, and how these figures are really very small compared to the 10 months of the COVID outbreak. So let's start with the attacks, cyber attacks to the health system. Why do I speak about the health system, the healthcare system? How much more sensitive can data be when compared to personal data that we get in the health system? So the attacks in the health units between 2017 and 2018 increased by 99%. And in 2018 to 29, they increased by an extra 17% in the 1 year after. This shows that the increase of cybercrime are not born, grow, and evolve, but they explode. the criminal and phenomena really spike upward, causing peaks in a year and progressive increases, like plus 17%. So why do I speak about this explosion, this peak? Because this affects the policies, the development policies, and the fighting crime, because this shows that we have no metabolization time frame. If we're attacked by 100%, how can we metabolize? We have minimal time, so these figures oblige us to really move quickly in fighting and in conducting research. Now we will look at Postal Police Service. We were established in 1998 as a postal and communications police service. And the following year, we became an Italian Ministry of Interior state police for communication. So we're not only a police force, but we represent an organ of a unit of the Italian Ministry of Interior. How are we organized? So we have a central unit, which is the one that I'm directing currently. And normally the departmental services coordinate the activities that occur in the territory. We work quite anonymously. We have a very strong central unit, and we're very strong at coordinating. And such coordination is worth highlighting because those of you who know the world that we're talking about, I don't know if you are familiar with, but not everyone is aware of what we are living through. And very often there's a risk of underestimating an aspect of life, which is our digital life. We keep distinguishing between online and offline, as if a life offline existed and then a life online existed when we access our computers, when such distinctions are kind of something to laugh at and seem very backward. When Flora said, there's a life online and that's it. Or when I hear people who faced with the threat, on the cyber threat, they say, I don't use social, so I feel quite secure, as if we were not all interconnected and constantly connected and immersed in a digital ecosystem that sees us all involved and partaking in it. I won't go on because it's quite a familiar topic. This ecosystem, which sees us all involved, knows no territorial boundaries. Those of us who operate within the police and within law, we've been used to thinking in terms of territorial competences. So if crime occurs in Naples, the police in Naples is the one that will have to deal with it. But the crime that is now occurring in Naples, for example, in child pornography that have been downloaded in Naples, have been at the same time been downloaded in Nigeria and Padua and France. So the barriers has to do with space and time has been, the internet makes it go beyond and entails a higher level of coordination that goes beyond national and includes the international level of coordination. And this leads us to a series of problems. And if we have enough time, I will mention them. So I'll go back to our central service and 20 regional offices and 80 provincial offices. We are the sector of the police, of the state police, which fights cybercrime, so digital crime. When we speak about them, it's to speak about it's just to speak about all aspects of our life and an all-rounded form of criminality and crime, to optimize our resources, which are not infinite, but are rather restricted and limited. We work especially on certain macro areas. Some are our exclusive competence, and others are the competence of prevalence. So the first is critical cyber attacks and critical infrastructure attacks. So companies that offer light transport, etc., big companies, important companies. Then there's a sector that has to do with minors, the protection of minors. So, for example, everything that goes against, that fights child pornography and child abuse and cyber terrorism, all those phenomena that engage in propaganda online, that see the internet as a protagonist and allow the recruiting of supporters and to spread their ideas in a very inconceivable, in a very short span of time that would be inconceivable without the internet. All hacking and financial cybercrime, which is currently, believe me, and you'll see it from the figures that you will be provided with, is a true urgency and real economic attack to the country's economy. And then all crimes that have to do with social network and postal crimes, which reflect our past. We originated in another way and then evolved we evolved through a real revolution. So our central service is an operative center, and all Italian offices depend on it. And in the central center has three operative sectors. The CNIP is a National Computer Crime Center in critical infrastructure protection. And the other one is a National Center Against Child Pornography Online. And the third is a commissariat of the police online, which is our portal, which provides information and allows alerts. I'll quickly go through one of the activities to fight child pornography and abuse of children, characterized by a very strong form of coordination and investigation and great international cooperation. And then I'll highlight the blacklist, which illustrates the technical difficulties that we have to face when forced to operate in a domain that that is not circumscribed territorially or spatially, and therefore does not have legislation norms that we are familiar with. National legislation is taken for granted, and if we come across a website that has child pornography and films that are on child pornography, if this server or website, this collection, were localized in Italy, we would implement our legislation and our judges and our courts, and we would obscure the site and perform all the necessary procedures. But if the site on pornography has the data that is localized, that are localized in either Germany or France or in Nigeria, in the Ivory Coast, in China, and so forth, evidently the decree would to block this would serve very little. We have international procedure, very long procedures with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I won't bore you with all the long process and procedures that would entail such confrontation with other states, would have to take into account many aspects. So we found a palliative when we come across a child pornography site, other than starting activities of comparison and contrast and informing other states internationally, if they collaborate and are willing to collaborate. There are at times states that do not collaborate. We are then creating a filter to access those images. So we order Italian providers to block access to those spaces where the images are located. So if you try to connect, and you will find that the access is prohibited due to X and Y reasons. I don't have to explain to you that anyone who is good at hacking or infiltrating will overcome such blocks. But this is what we can do up to now. It's the maximum we can do. This is what we can achieve with our legislation. So block the access to Italian users. If the Italian user is an expert user and can detour that filter and breach, there's very little else we can do other than activate international collaboration channels. This is figures related to against child pornography. So in cases of people who were investigated, what I'd like to highlight, in the first 11 months of 2020, the there was 110% rise of cases, and 75% of those who were investigated. So this is figures that are related to the pandemic outbreak. So when my limit is reached, please warn me, because the topic is really, really vast, and having to speak slowly to enable the translation may us go over time. So just warn me. The pandemic was an accelerator, an exponential accelerator. So I consider digitalization or smart working and digital services was definitely a precious service. So for example, let's consider this meeting. Normally I would have had to come to Padua, and I've done it for years, while today we didn't have to do away with such possibility, but we have performed it digitally, and this has occurred in all sectors of our daily life, both institutional, professional, and in our personal daily lives. So video conferences were not only work video conferences, but ones that enable us to be close to the ones we love. So let's think of the lockdown phase, to see those we loved and could not see physically, and also distance learning, online purchases, medical checkups, and medicine conducted online checkups. So what we tried to do virtually, all those things that we could not do physically. All of this has been a very precious resource, but at the same time has enlarged and expanded the surface of attack for criminals. So there's the other side of the coin to the positive. So an increase and an explosion of cyber crimes in the months that had to do to the COVID pandemic compared to the previous year. So that's one of the first things to bear in mind. I spoke about the National Computer Crime Center and Critical Infrastructure Protection Center, which deals with protecting through constant exchanges and data exchange the infrastructures that are digitalized. So critical structures that offer essential services. We conduct an intelligence services online, so we identify as soon as possible or as early as possible the threats that infect the network. And we have all kinds of information and data that come from the infrastructure themselves. So for example, an enterprise or a business that calls us, and we, by analyzing the data and the crime that they denounce, we get the technical data and investigate. we come across and access technical data that are connected to us, enabling them to boost their security services. For example, WannaCry, when there was an attack, which was like a kind of rehearsal to we received the first information by the states that were first attacked. And in the first 2 hours, we branched the information to the companies that were part of our infrastructure to help them improve their security levels. And I speak to you who are more experts. We all know that WannaCry was attacked thanks to a vulnerability which we were aware of. And there were updates, and those who had performed the updates were not attacked. I become allergic to certain, and I respond allergically, but it's true that some who did not update was attacked, but maybe we should start with the idea that not every user is evolved and updated. So we cannot only blame these users, but it's the ecosystem itself that has to become more secure and safer. And when you think of public institutions like the health system, the healthcare system, you know that many sectors, important sectors, still use XP, which cannot be updated anymore. Why? Because to update the license, you need financial strength that not everyone has. So not all companies have this possibility, nor public institutions at times cannot. So among those that were hit and broken into, it's not only those who did not update due to lack of awareness, but those who could not update due to lacking resources. And this is another problem, the lack of resource. So the companies that are with us, that have agreements with us, include the following. And we inform through our alerts. So these are important enterprises nationally through a public-private partnership as to offer the best possible solutions to improve cybersecurity. So this slide illustrates the companies that have the agreement with us. One, to show the level of our extension, so how widespread we are, and to see the impact of these companies. While some are critical infrastructures, no doubt, others could perhaps, why would Sky be vulnerable, or Uniero? And the list could go on, because we have no norm that defines critical infrastructures. It's it's a choice of the legislator, because our world domain, as we said, is a world that changes constantly, very rapidly. So an infrastructure that was critical some time ago may not be critical today. So think about companies that put cables undersea to bring the internet everywhere. 20 years ago, it was unthinkable, but nowadays it is defined as critical infrastructure. So we highlighted and emphasized this norm and considered critical those companies that have high employment rates or employ many people to attack a company and really break into it seriously, financially, economically. It means compromising its operativity, and therefore it means putting at risk 5,000 or 10,000 employees and working positions for our nation. And this, for me, is a critical profile. Then we've extended this even more. I described the partnership, private-public partnership. I will add that our Center for the Protection of Critical Infrastructure was established in 2006, so prehistoric time. So our country started to reflect on and ponder a structure for the protection of infrastructure, of digital infrastructure, and not only the physical protection of but even for the digital domain and virtual domain. Already in 2006, when the countries that were doing that were very few. And this is not to say how good we are, but to say that we are often considered, and we have a self-consideration that comes always lagging behind or in the last position. In many cases, this may be true, but in this case, we had an advantage. Now we should try not to waste such advantage. So we thought about it in the past. And lately, we've been thinking that from this system, so protecting infrastructure, critical infrastructure that are digitalized at the national level, left out a large area that should not be regarded less important. So the small and medium enterprises, which have vulnerabilities, important vulnerabilities in terms of not being aware and not having the funds to invest in security, in cybersecurity. So they are particularly vulnerable. And yet, small, medium enterprises are a very important segment of the GDP, the Italian GDP. As were public administrations, they were left out. So the first was the healthcare system, and as they learned, as you've seen, they're managed at a regional level. That's why we have undertaken a project, launched a project where the information that we have at the national level, which we confer to our critical infrastructure that have an agreement, we will then branch them out to offices at the regional level, who will then in turn become a sort of router for the other realities on the territory. So for instance, consider when the case of WannaCry occurred, which hit the UK, mostly the hospitals and health units and obliged the country to close at least eight emergency units. When we distribute our cybersecurity information with the companies that are with us, we also advised and informed health units, even though we did not have official relations with them. And we started calling health units, the more important health units around Italy, realizing that this was a very, very difficult operation. There were no special numbers devoted to dedicated numbers. Some had no heads of security that one could speak to. So there was no interlocutor, basically. So we published IOC, this security, and we published them on our commissariat online, hoping that subjects, sensitive subjects, especially the health units, would read them. And this is why we have undertaken this type of project, which is has proven to be extremely useful in this time of pandemics. So we've inaugurated a red protocol against threats during this dramatic period of pandemic, so that the information could be passed on to all regional points of reference to then branch out to the health services. We all know that the first serious episode in the Czech Republic, in which the hospital was blocked by ransomware during COVID, and the first death in Germany, a woman, serious case, was transported by ambulance to another hospital because the hospital she was at was attacked by ransomware, which blocked all of the systems. And during her journey, she died. So never as before, this type of digital security is pivotal and fundamental. Now let's look at the National Computer Crime Center to protect critical infrastructures. Figures related to pandemics in the first 11 months of 2020 compared to the first 11 months of 2019, there was an increase of 260% of attacks, reported attacks, and 77% increase in the number of people that are under investigation. This highlights the tsunami that this pandemic represents, a really violent accelerator of all phenomena of health, but also of criminal phenomena, which led to this spread of, to the extended spread of vulnerabilities for attackers. This acceleration is, to me, irreversible. So we are immersed and plunged in a new area, which has shortened our times to develop. Let's go on. So the attacks to critical infrastructures. So the attacks related to ransomware. Why do I speak of ransomware? In this period is particularly insidious. I'm sure that interlocutors and guests will understand me even without going on about it. They're particularly sophisticated. So they come after computer attacks, and often but they're not carried out through an email where you open an attachment, but they infiltrate the system directly. We've seen companies and enterprises being totally blocked in their administrative processes and in their manufacturing processes. So such figures are just the tip of the iceberg. Many companies, in fact, prefer to pay and not to report the crime because the cost they would have to bear, even for an extra block of the system, of their manufacturing process, would be fatal for their survival. I heard replies such as from CEOs telling me, for example, I can't tell you names, but faced with such 200,000 euro requests, ransom requests, where I advise not to pay for two reasons. One, because you never know, you will never get that sum back, or you will get the data back, because you will be financing and funding a criminal organization, but which needs everything but extra money to make an advance. But are you joking? 200,000 euros. I'd give 3 times as much to get all of my data back. This is what I received as a reply just to show how criminal organizations come up with the calculations when requesting ransom. I spoke about ransomware, but many companies, and we've got signals that point to this, not only they not only ask for ransom or related to data that is encrypted, but because the ransomware is preceded by a computer attack where the attacker's been there for months, so they can encrypt all the sensitive and vulnerable data, which they blackmail and threaten the company by saying that they will publish all of the vulnerable and secure data. So ransom and blackmail, which can have a third level, which can have a menace, the threat of a DOS attack, which would paralyze the company's system. Just to tell you and illustrate how the economic world is really vulnerable to threats and attacks. And here we are only facing the increase of small, medium enterprises, attacks to small, medium enterprises. We're not analyzing. And later there will be a slide of all of the financial crimes, included those to single private citizens. In the last 20 days, there's an urgency, an alarm. There's like accounts that have been emptied. So offices on the territory have had a peak of reports where they say that current accounts have been emptied through a series of different techniques. Phishing, smishing, all techniques of social engineering. So one of the most diffused one is that, for example, I may get an SMS from a number that is my bank and just is part of the SMSs that my bank sends. So this camouflage of the telephone system and VoIP calls, I see my bank number that tells me that my bank was compromised, and the techniques can be different to scare me. Then I get a call, and on the display, I see my bank's number, telephone number. So imagining it's a normal call and not being able to say that it's a VoIP call or that it's the postal police. Sometimes even our police number appears. So you receive an SMS. They tell you you've received an SMS where your bank account has been compromised, and I must give them a code that they will receive. And I get a PIN that the criminal wants to use. So the user, in good faith, gives the PIN to the criminal. Or if I have an app of my bank that generates a token, they tell me I'm trying to go quickly through the data. So I'll conclude by saying that I get the telephone call to deactivate to cancel my app because they need to somehow clear it or clean it. So I get rid of my app from my device. The attacker downloads it, and in a few minutes, my bank account has been cleared. We've had, in the last month, a peak of reports about this, especially related to the physical token of the banks. I wanted to speak about phishing, which is increasingly more sophisticated in a way to collect data. Terrorism, I'll do without, I'll skip that. Then there are other types of frauds, so the CO fraud. Adesso sento. Okay. So frauds related to the CO, which is always related to attacking a computer, where the malicious attacker remains inside without being detected and maps the company's genetic information. So obtaining information related to strategic information, transactions, and all of the business. And then the attacker creates a fake agreement, which is very similar to the real one, inducing whoever has to pay to pay on an IBAN that is not the right one. The highest amount ever paid is 18 million euros on the part of the multinational company. I'd like to highlight this figure. Financial cybercrime in the period from 2018 to now has increased by 443%. That's an extra 21% of frauded sums, and an increase of 267% of the sums that we have recovered, thanks to the collaboration of international police. When there's an early warning, we can often block the payment of the transactions. If the report comes after 20 days, we don't even find the bank, let alone the money. So, to an overview of related to financial cybercrime. And so artificial intelligence, the IoT and 5G network, and a broader perimeter for companies with smart working, which underscore the development, but even highlight the risk. This, I've already said it, mentioned it earlier. Our commissariat online during the pandemic, look at the percentages below. See the coronavirus and cybercrime emergencies, all the visits to our site that highlight the need to have information on the part of individuals to be informed. And this is alerts about fake news. There are many related to pandemics, which have led to misinformation and worrying. They have increased by 514%. Our alerts have increased by 365%. I'll have to stop, but this is just. I will now ask the speaker, the audience to ask questions and open the floor. I reflected on your observations on the spike and what you said as irreversible. I agree that it's going to be irreversible, and thank you to the increase of sums recovered, and thank you for all the work that you as police, postal police, do to combat this cybercrime. And also, even the sums that you mentioned, 18 million euros, start making you think how relevant the sum is. And all these figures highlight the importance of training people who specialize, as we do in our degree program, that highlight the ethics as well. So, and not only the postal police service, but also to help companies who really need outsiders who can specialize in this sector. I will leave the floor to questions, remarks, feedback.
Posso?
What types of work opportunities are there for in the postal police for those who have a degree in cybersecurity? These professional figures are very much sought after. Currently, we are making a call for technical inspectors which foresee this type of degree. And these technical inspectors are for the Postal Communications Police, our head office, or our leading figures realize the importance of having such figures and not counting merely on simple policemen who self-teach themselves and expand their knowledge in different sectors, but we need more structured figures. And there are technical rules official for officers. In my office here, I have 8 engineers. Some are IT, some other types of engineering, because my unit requires many technical expertise from many technical sectors. And I foresee that this will be true even more in the future. Thank you.
Sì,
Bruno had
grazie.
a question.
È una domanda un po' riguarda il ruolo della polizia. Okay. Riguarda il ruolo della polizia, grazie dell'esposizione, ad ogni modo. Il ruolo della polizia, oltre che andare contro, è anche prevenire il crimine. Ecco, mi chiedo, quindi il ruolo della laurea di Cybersecurity è quello di combattere, però poi c'è anche una parte che riguarda il prevenire. E questo mi sembra sia più un aspetto psicologico della cosa, cioè il portare fiducia a qualche email oppure farsi, per così dire, frodare. Questa è una parte completamente psicologica della cosa. Mi viene in mente adesso tutta la polemica sull'app Immuni, ad esempio, in cui si diceva l'app Immuni va contro la nostra privacy, apriamo il nostro vita su questo. Però non ho visto la stessa, e questa è una cosa completamente psicologica, la stessa critica sull'app che uno deve scaricare adesso per poi farsi ridare il 10% dei propri acquisti con la carta di credito. Non sono contrario alle 2 app, sono anzi molto positivo per le 2, ma vorrei solo sottolineare questa così dire, sfumatura psicologica tra le 2 cose. Penso nella prevenzione anche questo si dovrebbe prendere in considerazione.
Thank you for the question. It gives me the chance to specify. We're active also in terms of prevention. The Center the Center for Critical Infrastructure also undertakes protection, because when we speak about our investigation, collects news on the threats to then transfer them to all the companies and constituency, to the small, medium enterprises. We are actually undertaking prevention because we're giving them weapons to fight, but we're also doing prevention when we educate and train youngsters. We go to schools during campaigns, which you would not envisage police to teaching, but we teach students who know very little about this type of such domain, because yes, they do use the telephone, but they're not aware of what happens to their data and the risks of privacy. They can't tell fake from real news. So they have little information about what they risk legally and piracy and all of this. So we work on awareness. We should work more on awareness, but while schools are easy to attack, are easy to access because they're in class, adults instead they're more difficult to reach because everyone's busy. So whenever we have the chance, so schools, we do. So the Appy Immuni app, I smile about this thing. The Immuni app has been criticized from a technical profile, under the technical profile. History teaches us that we can infiltrate anyone from the Godfather. So the Appy Immuni seemed secure, but people who do everything over the social network, use social network, speak and reveal their personal data, use password like dog name and name of the daughter, or the same password for every service they use. And then all of a sudden, when Appy Immuni, they worry about their privacy. This makes me smile and astonishes me. Maybe it has to do with inefficient communication. So when this idea of not worrying about data, the passing on of data makes you smile. This has to do very much with the anthropological revolution, which I mentioned earlier. When I speak of this revolution, this is what I highlight, the fact that we're behind a screen. Our senses are not used, so our human parameters are not being used. And if you're not an expert, you tend to make a mistake. And a journalist once asked me, do you exclude, being a victim of this kind of attack? Obviously not. Naturally, by training, I'm very cautious, but everything's so well designed that distracted for a while, any one of us is vulnerable and can superficially accept something and be vulnerable. Our community, us, but none of us can exclude that we can fall in the trap, because we're all human beings. That's why I believe two things, and I'd like to highlight them. One, that being an anthropological revolution, you need years to metabolize it. So Facebook was born in 2004, not even 20 years, and it has 2 billion users. So we realize how this progress has had spikes, which we have not been able to elaborate. And two, we need to seriously reflect about the web. So this freedom of the internet is a bit of, there's a fine confine between being free and being wild on the web, which it's a reflection that needs to be pondered carefully. I don't want to, I'm the last to speak about or want to speak about censorship, but some type of reflection is called for. And that's why I speak about Renaissance in terms of human skills and humanities, because it deserves attention. I agree about the psychological and humanities side, which shows the importance of how, even in our degree system, we try to give expertise that go beyond the technical skills. Yes, in the internet, we're all the same. We're concluding a project now that will have a special protocol that will enable such data to go directly into the computer systems. When we didn't have this type of interaction, we did it through emails. Now we want IOC to be brought directly to the system. So we're working towards this platform, which should be completed soon. Good morning. I wanted to have a detail to when you obscure sites, changing the DNS. I ask myself if there's a motivation, a legal motivation, to choose at this level. So it's best to go on the easier solution. Is there a legislative motivation? We order providers to filter those contents. We say, you must filter the contents, but this must be done. This is foreseen legally. I can't do this for illegal vaccine. I can't use a blacklist for illegal vaccines. It's the legislation that must order. And for child pornography, it is foreseen. Now there's a law that is being passed that foresees for the selling of drugs, the trade of drugs, but I cannot use it for all kinds of things. It has to be foreseen within the law system. The blacklist, is there a reason why it's done by name and not? We just ask for filtering and DNS. We do not specify it. We just ask that the site be obscured and not made to be accessed. Even companies are undertaking prevention and teaching their staff. So, for example, counterattacks against phishing. Companies are trying to adapt and do something. Surely, often, man is the weak link of the chain. But to give the single user all the responsibility is not right. You need a real collaboration. All the actors and players, private and public, of high levels must contribute to make this ecosystem as safe as possible. And then even the end user should little by little gain awareness, perhaps helped by more important players. Big companies are investing a lot in cybersecurity and knowledge. We see this, even though there are some exceptions, even high important companies that commit silly acts that surprise. Unfortunately, data tells us that there's an imbalance, that to attack, you may even need very little, but to defend yourself, you have no alternative but to spend a lot of money. So big companies, the really big companies, important companies that can afford it, in general, they're investing. The smaller ones and middle enterprises have more difficult time in investing. And this is why we are also moving and shifting towards small, medium enterprises. A great effort on our part, which they also, the small, medium enterprises are a threat to bigger enterprises, because in their interactions, the attacks can be the Trojan horse to infiltrate a bigger company. That's why bigger companies are trying to reframe their find new measures and reframe their measures. So another question. The participant asked, cybercrime attacks to health structures, is it to block services? Is it like a terrorist attack? Could it be considered a terrorist attack? Crimes can be manifold. It's not easy. Many have motivations that have to do with economic motivation. So if you hit and attack a hospital with ransomware and then you ask for the ransom, you can make huge profits. But when there are attacks that get information, sensitive information, so they can be used for anything. They could be used for against a public figure or for insurance purposes, so that the motivations behind using individual data and information, there could be many motivations to steal this sensitive information, and it is worrying. It could be a terrorist attack. Any type of motivation could hold true. So data, we know, is today's most precious commodity, which everyone is trying to access in legal ways. They're trying to access in legal ways or borderline ways. And we know that many data are spied on, and attackers are in these computer system, and individuals don't even realize this. So maybe for 3 years they've been there and there was no report and accusation. So this is a very delicate situation. You spoke about collaboration between postal police and very important company enterprises in terms of number of employees they hire. In parallel, there have been DCPM about the territorial perimeter of security to identify the companies, vital companies for Italy. Is there a relation between postal police and these specific enterprises? We're part of the entire system. We're part, as Ministry of Interior, Cybersecurity, we're within this system, and under the NIS legislation, as a unit that fights this, so we are involved in new type of architecture that gives the country a frame and a form that is new and more specific to digital security. Related to your activity, how much of it has to do with the relations with other institutions, and how much to enterprises, and how much has to do with individuals. Who are you working most with? It's a hard battle. We work transversely. We're extremely busy. So be it single private individuals. So, for example, the bank accounts that are being compromised, people who have really lost a lot of money, or social networks, and women who have been led to desperation, to pictures online or fakes. So we could speak for hours, but even the financial system, all of the companies, and the terrorist phenomenon, I can't really say which is the most important sector, because they're all really important, and all with very urgent, exposed to urgent crime threats. What's the role of antiviruses in companies, and are they useful? Antivirus are useful naturally, but it depends on the type of attack. So if I have a small enterprise or company and have no enterprise and have no antivirus, you're at zero level. But when you're in front of a new type of attack, a new type of malware, the antivirus the usefulness of the antivirus is limited. It's a good idea to have an antivirus, just at least to stop the more traditional type of attacks. So thank you very much for all of your time, for your speech, and for the presentation that you have given us, highlighting all highlighting the importance of the need towards cybersecurity, and the need to invest, even as a nation, in security, cybersecurity. Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. Let's hope that we see each other personally in Padua.